This is Father Gregory Pine.
This is Father Bonaventure Chapman.
And welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoy the show, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. For this episode of Guestsplaining, we are very delighted to be joined by Johannes Hartl. Thanks so much for joining the podcast.
Hello.
So I guess I first came in contact with you. Well, I'm only coming into contact with you now, but previously I came in contact with your work through the testimony of a friend, Stephanie, who said there's something really awesome going on in Augsburg at the Augsburg Gebetshaus. And from that, from the prayer and the work of Johannes Hartl, you have all these just really wonderful initiatives, which have had a beautiful influence on the church in Bavaria, the church in Germany, the church in the German-speaking world and beyond. So I was excited at the prospect of having a conversation, but maybe by way of introduction, could you just say a word about yourself, your family, what you do, and the things you're involved in?
Yeah, sure. You know, as a teenager, I was brought up Catholic, and as a teenager, like faith and religion didn't make any sense to me at all. So I had something like a real conversion experience, but I felt the urge to tell other young peoples about it in a language that they can comprehend. So this really has marked me for the rest of my life, that I see we have so much beauty in our faith tradition, and we don't have a language, we don't have a cultural expression to actually bring it across. So over the last 20 years, I've really tried to build places, to build conferences where actually non-church people have a chance of actually meeting God, and to establish ways of communication for unreached people. Germany is very secularized. Unchurched people have a chance to know about God. So I started the Augsburg House of Prayer, and I started different movements. Besides that, I'm married, 4 kids, and that's about it.
That's awesome. Maybe just one small thing with which to begin. You talk about, meeting people kind of where they are. You talk about hosting conversations, or even more, with the unchurched. You talk often enough in your podcast about Schönheitssinn und Verbundenheit. This idea of like you can meet people in places where they're already looking, but perhaps looking without, like a vocabulary or a grammar to enunciate what precisely they're looking for.
Yeah.
So could you describe maybe just a little bit your approach in your testimony and your witness?
Yeah. There was a billboard once sponsored by a nice Christian. It said, "Jesus is the answer." And somebody allegedly wrote below, "Yes, but what's the question?" So before you try to answer a question, make sure that you have understood the question. So 500 years ago, there was a guy in Germany called Martin Luther who had a question. And the question was, how do I get a merciful God? Right? So this sparked the Reformation. Today in Germany, nobody has the question, how do I get a merciful God? Nobody cares about that. But humans have questions. We have desires. So I try to approach them on the pathway of desire. I think really desires are our greatest allies, because people have a desire for beauty. They have a desire for fascination. They have a desire for meaning, for purpose, and for deep connections. I think those desires are engraved in our hearts by our Creator. And by addressing those desires, it's actually pretty easy to point towards the source where the water of life comes from.
Johannes, this is great. People in America, I used to think that we were a Christian nation and we wouldn't have trouble like Europe would have with secularization, all this kind of stuff. I mean, I didn't think everyone was Christian, but I thought more or less we'd be fine. Europe's doing its own thing. But maybe 10 years ago, I just realized that basically you're just ahead of us a little bit in some way of saying ahead. And that like this is the kind of experience that Europe has with just total secularity in a way is coming here. So it's good to talk to the America's future and talking to you, like what it's going to be looking like. So you talk about desires and about beauty in this way. What do you find best, or what's the kind of the easy strategy in or the best strategy to getting at people's desires through beauty, for instance? What do you do in your work of evangelization that kind of lands that maybe could help us think about preparing ourselves for the same kind of evangelization?
Well, I think of two things. The first one, in Acts 17, Paul goes to Mars Hill to discuss with non-Christians the whole philosophical concepts of the day. So he goes where the society has the discourse. So where is today's Mars Hill? I do believe it's the internet. This is the place where new ideas are spread. So we need to use it. We need to be present there. This is my first answer. The second answer is, you could say, in the age of Spotify, who would go to a live concert anymore, right? You can listen to virtually all music for free. But lo and behold, people still go to a Taylor Swift concert. They pay $1,000 to go there. They fly half around the globe to attend it. She plays in hundreds of concerts because there is still a market, so to say, of life experiences. So we need both. We need a digital strategy and we need manifestations. If you think about the liturgy really is like a showcase of beauty. It is a celebration of something that you can taste, that you can even smell. So we have to come up, we have to create new cultural expressions for that, because not everybody is ready to instantaneously grasp the beauty of the liturgy. So maybe you have to come up with other types of conference formats and concerts and stuff like that. But I would focus on these two things at the same time.
Yeah, this idea of finding the kind of new agora or the new Mars Hill, it seems like, yeah, you're doing that not just with the medium, but you're also doing that with the content. So like nowadays, a lot of people are talking about ecology. There's a kind of dread that has creeped into the discourse wherein a lot of young people fear that there won't be a future for them because they fear, planetary death. And then digitalization, we talk about artificial intelligence, and we might worry today as to I don't know, like the implications of that technology for our workplace or for our university or for whatever else. But it doesn't seem like in the broader secular context, many people are trying to envision and provide for the human reality, like as we are to be enshrined as the crown of creation, or we are to be kind of accounted for as those evincing true intelligence. But it seems like these types of conversations, like the more contemporary conversations, are precisely the types of ones that you want to engage or enter. Could you touch on that just a little bit? Why it's so urgent, or maybe why it's so important to you to wade into these waters?
Well, it's interesting that both topics, AI and climate change, they both ask a question about the nature, of human beings. So the whole climate thing, which is huge, the ecological movement really has had a big impact in Europe, but basically frames human beings as a plague, as a cancer to the planet. We are the problem, right? So you can ask the question, well, why is life, why is existence being better than non-being? It's a deep philosophical question. Is there an intrinsic value to human life, right? If you think about AI, if AI thinks faster than us or appears to think faster than us, is creative more faster than us, more efficient than us, what is the use of humans anymore? So I think this is the right time to ask a very simple question. If we are able to live carbon neutral, if we are able to save the planet, but we have to live without meaning and purpose, without social relationships, and without beauty, why should we then live? And why is this planet worth saving? So these are all questions that are highly relevant for young people. Or even to ask like, all right, you're vegan, you don't eat meat because animal life is of intrinsic value to you. So what about human life? So basically it's still the agora, the Mars Hill approach to see what is the big question. And I do believe the big question of future will be, what is a human being? And how does human life look like? And what kind of a society do we want to build for humans? And what values are behind that?
Yeah, I love this. I'm reminded of Michel Foucault at the end of Order of Things. He talks about the erasure of man, like it's going to be erased in the sea, like in the way that a face on the sand eroded away as the water comes in. And I think this is kind of the tide of modernity or post-modernity or something, the current secular regime, secular world, that you're right, that humanity seems to be being erased without us knowing it. And we haven't had to deal with, like, I mean, I don't think 1500s climate change meant apocalypse. So that wasn't in your control. But now we have these questions to be, what does it mean to be a human being? And you're right to say that it might be a good moment now where we're ready to ask and have an answer to, maybe there's something important about that. And maybe the whole point of the world is something about humans. Like that if we could save the world by getting rid of all of us and just have a world back to, I don't know, reptiles are coming back to rule it or something, would that be something people would like? I don't think anyone would want that. I mean, like,
Well, there
no
wouldn't
one
be
would think
anyone.
that.
There wouldn't be anyone
Right.
around anymore, right?
Right,
want
but you would
anything.
if someone said like, look, why don't we just, what the best way to save the climate change, stop climate change and all of this is just to get rid of all the humans. And I think people would think like that's not a real solution. And then you want to raise the question, why don't you think it's a real solution? Because everything you talk to me about, like humans, you've already put us down on this lower level. Animals are more important. That's the intrinsic value. So like, I think that's a great way of bringing into, you all do believe that humans are important. We're not just saving the environment for the environment's sake. It's really for us, right? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, sure. I did an analysis on science fiction movies. And science fiction used to be positive until early 80s. And then you had those movies kind of like Terminator, and then you had Matrix, and you had Waterworld, you had iRobot, all those movies, and they are all purely negative. You cannot name, I believe, you cannot name one single science fiction movie that is positive in outlook. It is always the machines winning the fight against us humans. So what has changed in our perspective? And I do believe that those movies actually are made because people do not want to create a future that is non-human. We are afraid of that. But the funny thing is, we do believe that this is like a Tower of Babel that we are actually in the process of building. So people think about AI, they think about digitalization, and they are used to it and fascinated by that. But they are convinced that we are in the process of building a not a future with a human face. So we started a new movement with the slogan, Future with a Human Face. So what would a society, what would a future look like that is actually humane? What does it need? And I come back to those three ingredients. We need connection. We don't want to be lonely, but connectedness runs deeper than only you and I. It's more complete. The second thing is meaning. If you don't have meaning and purpose in your life, you're just lost. And the third thing is we do need beauty. Nobody wants to live in a world without colors or without music. Man doesn't live by bread alone. And again, if we save the planet, but we lose connectedness, meaning, and beauty, we go distinct too, just in a different way, right? So even the human heart is an endangered species that needs saving.
That's cool. I think in listening to some of the podcasts that you have produced, I was struck by this, I don't know how best to describe it, but like this kind of okayness with, this kind of comfort with certain human inefficiencies. I think one of the things that makes folks nervous when it comes to digitalization or when it comes to ecology is that human beings can be really inefficient. And we find ourselves so exercised trying to make them more efficient that sometimes we prefer they were not. They didn't like weigh down whatever work that we're trying to do with their humanity. But it seems like, these types of the values that you're proposing, connectedness, meaning and purpose, and beauty, there's a kind of, I don't know, delightful inefficiency to some of them. Like at the end of the day, somebody has the chance to say, all right, should I read a beautiful novel for a little bit, or should I catch up on emails because that'd make my email next, like tomorrow morning, a little less burdensome. Like we catch ourselves in these patterns of efficiency, which end up draining our lives of a lot of their enjoyment, a lot of their delight. I remember you saying at one point that you dedicate a significant amount of time each morning to prayer, just being in silence with the Lord. So could you maybe just talk a little bit about, the kind of thread of efficiency and the place for some inefficiency in a purposeful, meaningful life?
Well, God created human beings in a garden. not in a factory, not on a highway. And even a garden is not a plantation. Back then, a garden basically was something like a park only rich people could afford. It was in a way, it didn't have a purpose, so to speak. It was just there for beauty. And actually, beauty is so important because beauty and art remind us on the fact that we are not purpose-driven alone. So if I ask you, what benefit is it that you watch the sunset? You say, what benefit is it? It's beautiful. All right. So what benefit is it for you to listen to a beautiful music piece? You say, why? I mean, it's beautiful, right? Beauty is not a means to an end. It's an end to itself. Beauty basically means to agree with the goodness of being itself. If you see something beautiful, you have to admit it is good that there is something rather than nothing. So it really leads us back to the fact that I do not create my own being, but my being already is a gift. Beauty is a gift that wants to be welcomed and wants to be seen. And the subtle lie of perfectionism and this mentality of I have to be efficient all the time, basically is making my work into an idol. Basically, only if I work correctly, only then I'm justified in my existence, so to speak. So this is basically a deep lie. This is like you have to pay for your entry ticket into the Garden of Eden. No, you don't. You don't have to work yourself up to your right to exist. No, you don't.
Yeah, I teach philosophy of art, and we just finished Kant's third critique, and that's where you start getting the real heavy apparatus behind art for art's sake. The fact that beauty can be an end to itself and aesthetics, and it becomes this kind of transcendental notion. So I'm totally for that, and I'm tempted to run down that hardcore, but we're not going to go there right now because I have another question.
Unfortunately,
Go
I would love
for
to.
it.
I would
Go
love to.
for
All right,
it.
let's do it.
Let-
Let's do it.
let
Let's
me
do it.
just-
Yeah, talk about beauty.
Yeah, just one thing, once my daughter approached me. We live in an old city in Augsburg, it was a Roman city, but then we have all these modern concrete buildings. And she said to me, Daddy, how can it be? All the new buildings are ugly, all the old buildings are beautiful. What have we lost? I found that it was a very, very intelligent question, because I can tell you what we have lost. We have lost beauty when two sentences entered our philosophy. The first was by David Hume, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which is a deep lie. Beauty is not in the eye of the beholder alone. And the second sentence was the designer's credo, form follows function. No, if the form only follows the function, beauty is lost in the process. So these are our two root problems, I believe.
Yeah, no, all right. I'm gonna a little bit on this one. I like this because I just love beauty, and talking about it. But yeah, I work really hard with my students to get them to realize that when you say beauty is the eye of the beholder, you can say that, but we've all got the same eyes. So if right, because this is Kant's view is beauty is a subjective judgment, but it has this cool universality in the sense that we're all created in the same way, so we all register beauty in this way. And the other thing about beauty I want to say is, so let's put it this way, dealing with Kant and switching to Balthasar. Balthasar makes this claim that that we need to switch the order of evangelization of the critiques. Not that you'd ever use Kant's critiques to evangelize, but Kant has the critique of pure reason, which is truth, and the critique of practical reason, which is goodness, and then he has the critique of judgment, which includes beauty and biology. Leave the biology off. And Balthasar, right, his insight is that, and Robert Barron, Bishop Barron picks this up, I think, is we need to flip these today. We need to start with beauty, then go to goodness, the drama of salvation, and then we can talk about truth. But people, if we just start with truth claims with people in the faith today, they're inoculated to that because of stupid relativism. But if we start with beauty, they all, as you say, he has this insight that everyone recognizes there's something beautiful, and and then that's a foothold in. So do you have a similar kind of strategy? Like, is beauty one of your options in starting with people, or do you think it's the best option today to start with people to get them engaged?
Well, I love Balthazar, and basically I do agree. I just want to add, I do believe that we are right now experiencing the end of postmodernity. And I think there is a new age coming right now. I think the very young people will be very, very open for truth again, because they live in an age of confusion. They are desperate to. There is a reason why a book title like 12 Rules for Life, could be a bestseller, right? Give me something real that I could grasp. Not necessarily like an idea of truth, but practical truth, like in the Aristotelian way of saying it. So, but basically, I do believe that especially if it comes to religious experience, we have to speak and to learn to speak the language of beauty again. Also, beauty is excellence. So sometimes it's just things done properly and done in a generous way, so to speak, and in a kind way, can bring across the beauty of the content. Yeah. So, for example, if the way we build our house, the house of prayer, the way we build our conferences, they are very beautiful. It's actually secular people from the conference market, so to speak, people who organize conferences themselves. They come to our Christian conference to study conference technique because it's the best conference in the market. So it's speaking about sound and light show. It's as professional as you can be. And we try to hire the best people in the market to do that. Because why? Well, just look at how they used to build churches 500 years ago. They hired the best architects in the world. And I don't care if those people are Christians. I want to have the greatest artists for that.
Yeah. There's something honest about the objectivity of art, right? So when you ask, like, what's the standard of prudent action? Well, it's rectified appetite. So like, how do you judge prudent activity? Well, look to the wise man and do what he does, and then check whatever tendencies of, like intemperance or cowardice or potential injustice, right? So seek to rectify your appetites and then act in accord with that, which is really hard to pin down, which is why when people ask, like, what should I do with my life? The answer is always, well, you could do any number of things. But with art, there's a kind of stark objectivity to it where you can just put a finger on the object itself and say, this is more beautiful than that. And I think many people are able to recognize that when it's not a person. When it's a person, then a lot of the kind of like, well, I don't know if I want to say that comes into the conversation. I remember there's this kind of interview with Dorothy Sayers when she first produced one of her plays, The Man Who Was Born to Be King. Like a pious woman asked her, who did she choose to play the angels? Did she choose the men who were most pious or devout or whatever? And she goes, no, I chose the ones who were most terrifying. I chose the ones who would most kind of capture, like in the best actors, the ones who would most capture the angelic spirit. Against the backdrop of the objectivity of art, it strikes me that the work that you do might make some Christians uncomfortable because you're willing to have conversations with people whom they might think like, I don't agree with him on everything, so I don't know if we could. How do you navigate these conversations, or how do you navigate these engagements with a kind of freedom without fear that, I don't know, something might tarnish you or something might, you might end up getting canceled or something like that?
I love those spiritual, non-religious people, for example. I go to their podcasts and I try to treat people as if they were real people. So my categories, are you Christian? Are you Catholic? What are you? It's just not that important to me. I always believe that we all have the same questions in our heart. And I do believe that the way how we communicate and the way how we do things is about as important as what we actually do and what we actually say. And honestly, I once experienced a TV show where there was a great openness. It was actually a creative show where they played music and everybody started to open up and speak about deepest topics in his or her life. And I asked myself, so why is this culture enabling this openness of heart? And actually, they started to speak about God. It was in German television. I knew some of the producers, so I approached them. I asked them, what is the secret behind that? And they told me, well, first of all, it's a place of beauty, so it's about creativity and art. The second one is it's really friendly and warm and welcoming. You could see that. The third thing is it was fun. Everybody had a beer. There was a campfire. So and the fourth thing is it was actually really professional. It was well done. So I asked myself, if you would ask people, how was Jesus? Was Jesus fun to be around? Well, if I read the gospel, I think he was a very friendly and warm and fun to be around kind of a person. Was he spiritual? Could you feel something spiritual in him? Everybody would say yes. So if you ask the same thing about the Catholic Church in Germany, is this a spiritual place? Or is your yoga center more spiritual? Everybody would say the yoga center is more spiritual. Well, okay, is it a warm and friendly place? Or is it rather a cold and judgmental place or intellectual place? Well, it's a cold place. So what about fun? Is it a fun place? Is there laughing? Or is it a place of grim faces? And is it done well? Is it a place of excellence and beauty? Or is it boring? Well, it's boring. So I do believe oftentimes church culture contradicts all of that, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
How come? I another story. It's not a fun story, but it's a fun story. A friend of mine used to work for great hotels and bars, and he sniffed a lot of cocaine, drank a lot of champagne, and he ended up burned and broken. So he converted. He became a Catholic. He became a Christian. So after 1 year, he did all the seminars, he went to the monasteries, and then he approached me and said, Johannes, I have a problem. Since 1 year, I live with Jesus, but I come from a background of hospitality, of beauty, of celebration. So I've been in your retreat centers for 1 year now. I can tell you something. The food is not good. The place is ugly. People are not friendly. And you speak about beauty and about love. So what's wrong with you guys? And honestly, I had to travel to many of the seminar and retreat centers and church parish centers. And I have to say, I agree. There's something wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is so I love the excellence as a part of evangelization and just part of being human. But I think so we mentioned Jesus. He's important in this. And because you're talking about a place with a human face, and you might think like, oh, this is all good for secular humanism, like good old-fashioned 20th century kind of secular humanism stuff. Like we're just being good humans in humanity. But I think the paradoxical claim that Christianity makes, which I suspect you're making here in your kind of ministry in a certain way, is that if you want humanity, you have to have Christianity in the face of Christ. Like you can't have a human face without his face determining what that human face looks like. And so your approach is one of using the question of what it is to be man. And the answer is shockingly, I suspect, Jesus Christ. And that it's not like secular humanism versus Christianity, 1-to-1. It's like you don't get any humanity unless you already have also the incarnation, like the divine man himself. So how does Christ, although of course you might strategically, I don't want to say strategically, it sounds like an American business model or something, but how do you propose, so Christ is, I assume, this face. It's not just that he's a great exemplar of this, like, look, he just, the best human we've got so far was this guy, but rather it's not coming up, but rather top down, like he reveals, Gaudium Spes 22 from Henri de Lubac's Catholicism, Christ reveals man to himself and makes his calling clear and all this kind of business. So how does Christ reveal this human face, and how do we tell people that this is the case without them going, oh no, I thought it was just in for the human stuff, and now you're bringing this Jesus stuff? Like, how do you tell them, like, actually, no, you can't have the human stuff without the Jesus stuff, but the Jesus stuff doesn't get rid of the human stuff?
The whole YouTube thing and reaching the secular people is not the first thing that I started. Actually, we first started a house of prayer, which is a place of nonstop prayer where prayer and worship has been going on for over 13 years now. So it's basically 110,000 hours of straight night and day prayer. I do believe that all fruitfulness flows out from the place of intimacy with the Lord. So this is the story behind it. You can speak about the water without necessarily mentioning the source of it well in the first conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very natural to start with something people can relate to, but eventually they will taste it. And I do believe in evangelism, even we can be bold mentioning Jesus, but we don't have to mention Jesus in every single step on the way.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe just one last question. I was talking to my sister recently. We were actually talking to her on the podcast, and she recently made the decision to homeschool her children. And she said sometimes we're tempted to return to an easy slavery rather than embrace a hard freedom. And like she wasn't calling traditional schooling easy slavery, but just thinking there of the Israelites as they begin their exodus, they're tempted to return to Egypt because they were well fed, you know. And I think that like some of the ministry that you undertake, the types of conversations that you have, the types of programming which you endorse, it's kind of, I think a lot of people would find it a little scary. And it strikes me that it falls in the category of hard freedom. I think, like thinking about my own dispositions when it comes to promoting an event, sometimes we just say to ourselves, well, we'll just preach to whoever shows up, but we don't necessarily do everything that we can to get people to show up. And so when 8 people are there, we're like, well, these are the 8 people that God sent. But then for me, the question is like, what did you do to help attract them? Like, what did you do to help draw them? So could you talk a little bit about that kind of like that hard freedom of operating in that space of trying to, kind of get out there in places which are a little bit scary?
Well, Jesus actually got out there. He even walked pagan territory. So he actually walked every single day. He didn't wait for God to bring him the people. Actually, I believe sometimes it's like a spiritualistic, whatever, kind of a pride in disguise. Because it takes steps of humility to actually start something that help people understand what you're trying to say to them, right? It is humility to go to that level where people actually can grasp what you try to give them. So I had to study marketing and digitalization. And I'm a student of language. We as House of Prayer, we are a student of secular language. What use is the gospel if nobody understands the language you are communicating it? What use is a beautiful conference where people have a chance to meet Jesus if nobody knows about that beautiful conference? So we have to invest in communication. Yeah, I think it's a worthwhile endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
And a much needed one. Most people have no idea what you're talking about. People are not evil. Most people are not stupid. Some are, but like most of our concepts just don't make sense. They've never understood anything. So and especially as in the Catholic Church, we're so used to people still coming even if they don't understand what we are trying to say. But it's a whole new situation now. In postmodern times, faith is one option amongst many, and people will flock to the option that makes sense, that is beautiful, that they actually can feel has relevance for them. So it is an act of humility to show them that this is relevant for them.
Yeah. I read this book. It's called The Edge of Sadness, and it tells the story of a priest in a kind of suburban parish. He's a parochial vicar, and he's preaching to his congregation each day, and he doesn't really think that most of what he's saying actually registers, and he kind of despairs of the efficacy of his ministry. But there's one parishioner who's always very attentive every time he preaches. He's just wide-eyed, seeming to take in every word that is spoken. And so looking for some encouragement or looking for some kind of inspiration, the priest approaches this man at the end of Mass one day and says, like, what is it in my homilies that you find so interesting or inspiring? And he comes to discover that the man is not a native speaker of English.
He's just excited that there's this other thing happening. Yeah.
So it's just a devastating conclusion. But, on the one hand, you could take that as a nihilistic point, like, well, there's no communication to be had. Or on the other hand, you could take that as a kind of hopeful point, like, all right, Lord, teach me to speak in the human tongues, by the inspiration of your Holy Spirit, with a vocabulary and a grammar that my contemporaries can understand, sympathize with, and perhaps even be attracted to, insofar as it reveals you and mediates you. So, yeah, I'm very appreciative for that. I'm very touched by that.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, if somebody here is interested to see how I try to do that, I do have an English YouTube channel as well and an English Instagram channel as well. So it's Johannes Hartl English, both in YouTube and Instagram.
Oh, fantastic!
That's tremendous. Yeah, that was going to be my next question. So, for folks who
you
want
have to learn
up,
German, yeah.
Ganz genau. Man muss Deutsch lernen. Ja, um das Evangelium zu predigen.
Immer und ewig. Amen.
Ganz genau. Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much for taking the time. Thanks so much for having the conversation. We appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. Bye.
All right. Turning to you, the listener, thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Godsplaining. If you haven't yet, do subscribe through YouTube or your podcast app. And you can check out Godsplaining.org for upcoming events, of which there are a few, and then for merchandise and other things besides. So know of our prayers for you. Please pray for us, and we'll look forward to chatting with you next time on Godsplaining.